And so forward to this discussion for quite some time. I was introduced to self-directed care, but I didn't know that term. And when I heard about it, I was like, wow, more people need to know about this. The tough thing is I learned about it, and I learned about the program in Virginia, but a lot of people were asking me about programs in their state. And then I had the good fortune of meeting Mark Altieri and his colleagues at public partnerships, and they are involved in these self-directed care programs all throughout the country in different states. And so I couldn't think of a better person to come on board and share with us what is self-directed care and how we can access it for ourselves, our families, and our clients. So Mark, I'd love to have you join me on stage here, and we can engage in what I'm sure is going to be a thought-provoking and informative discussion. But before we dive into it, let's get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Steve. Thank you to all the participants that are taking time out of their day to listen about self-directed care, which 16 years ago, before I came to public partnerships, I too had never heard of before. 16 years before that, I spent my time working for the Head Start preschool program, longest federally funded program in our country's history because it works. Providing a preschool education as well as healthcare monitoring, dental care monitoring. And I worked with at-risk families throughout communities. I'm based in Massachusetts, and got to a point in my career where I wanted a master's degree and opted to go back to the School of Brandeis in Massachusetts and got my MBA at the Heller School of Social Policy and Management. Great appreciation for the policy side of anything we're doing as a country, publicly funded. And then the operations side also intrigued me. As I got into grad school, my wife, Nicole, and I opted to have our first son. And Jackson was born a healthy child. And at 1 month, he went into cardiac arrest. And at 1 year, after a long year, he received a heart transplant at about a year old. Not something, Steve, my wife and I had on the life radar.
None of us do. Yeah.
I bring it up because it was my first personal experience with, at 31 years old, being an independent adult that was no longer independent when it came to caring for a loved one. My wife and I needed help. We needed professional help. So when he came home from the hospital post-transplant, we had occupational therapists, speech therapists, cognitive therapy specialists, skilled nurses for his G-tube, all coming in and out of our home, the most personal of places, whether you're 8, 18, or 80, is our homes. Some of those providers were incredible, and we needed them for their professional skill, but we also needed them to care for our son. And whether it's caring for my grandmother now in her home or my son, when it's a loved one, I want you to be professional. I want you to be caring, not as much as a parent, I get it, but we want the care, we want the trust, the honesty, and we want that provider or that support to know, I want to stay independent as much as I can. It's the most fundamental principle we all have as an adult. And during that time, some of the providers didn't check all those boxes. And what we found was we had no choice other than to call and maybe ask for a different physical therapist. But then what we found is sometimes the next provider that came over was a little jaded, that the Altieris were difficult to deal with and were too demanding. And you could feel the tension. And when you want to focus on your health as an aging adult, you want to focus on your health and your life and living your life. And you need a support to help you do that. But you don't want personal dynamics there. So I graduated from grad school, and I will be honest with you all. A colleague in school said, "Hey, there's this company called Public Partnerships that does work in this field called self-direction, where it is a model where we're trying to give individuals that need long-term care the most choice and control and maintained independence as they can." And it sounds like, based on your personal experience with your son, this might be a company you'd be interested in working for. And 16 years later, I'm still interested in doing this job. And our role falls within self-direction. But I am here today to talk to you, Steve, and everybody listening about what the model is. And
Yeah,
I'm coming to you with that.
that's great. Now, I didn't think about this, and I hope that this is not uncomfortable, but how's Jackson? Like, is he okay?
Yeah, so why I love doing these shows, talking to people like you and talking to your audience is at the purest form when we help each other. And I was just abroad actually in Italy and came back to the United States, and this country rallies around each other in really fantastic ways. And we have our warts and we know what they are. But he turned 17 in Rome, Italy, playing in a public concert in a 2,000-year-old church on his cello, when we were told he would never speak, he would
Wow.
never have fine motor skills, he would not have the cognitive functioning because he was on life support so many times, to really understand mathematics. He's a straight A student in all AP courses, and one hell of a cellist. And people like you ask how he is, and that is the human element of the work that we all do, and that we need to do and need to rely on each other to have this model of self-directed care be as powerful as I think it can be, and I hope your listeners think it can be over the next half hour.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, man. Well, number one, I was a little bit nervous about asking that question, but that is
Yeah.
a great outcome, and no matter what, it's wonderful. So let's kind of get down to what is self-directed care, and I think one of the things that one of the reasons why I'm really interested in expanding people's awareness about this, it's tied to Medicaid, correct?
It is. And the quick history lesson, because it's a really good one. A gentleman by the name of Ed Roberts in the 70s was accepted to Berkeley out in California. He was in a wheelchair, had a multitude of disabilities, and found that he was not getting the same type of treatment that other students were getting. And from there stemmed the disability rights movement. And from there stemmed this desire for anyone, aging adult, developmentally disabled, child, adult, anyone with a traumatic brain injury, anyone with a physical disability has all the same rights to remain independent to the best of their ability for as long as they can. And we as a country started to get behind this concept through the 70s and 80s and 90s, and different states started allowing for aging adults who needed long-term care in their homes to be able to select those caretakers that they wanted to come in and provide 12 to 15 to 20 hours of what is now commonly known as assisted daily living activity support. Those are the activities, and I like to talk about my neighbors a lot, Sharon and Ernie, who are in their early 80s. I go over each Saturday to bring their recycling and trash to our transfer station. And Ernie is breaking down physically, but he is sharp as a knife mentally. And every morning on Saturday, we take about 15 minutes for him to load his own recycling. And he always turns and says, "I'm sorry." And I always say, "I love watching you, man. I love watching you be independent until the last minute, because once we start giving up some of the basic assisted daily activities and need help, that is when we're disempowered, maybe for the first time." States started to recognize at the federally funded level, which often is Medicaid. I didn't know, so I always like to put it out there. I always think Medicare, more health insurance, Medicaid, more long-term care assistance when life throws you a curveball or we get old, and we are all going to get there, and we're all going to need that help. So it wasn't really until the late 90s, early 2000s that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services said, we get it. We've seen it done in California or in Arkansas or Florida or New Jersey on a pilot basis. We've heard things like the quality of care is surprisingly better when you're picking your own staff. I cannot understate the mental health component that goes with getting support by who you want, respectfully, the way you want it, on the schedule you want it, and having choice over who does. My wife and I got into quite a mental funk when some of those abilities were taken away and we became reliant on whoever was available to take care of our son for these that component started to come out in some of the pilots too, that it was consistency of the person. It was Nancy, a lifelong friend, getting hired by Karen to do work she was already doing. Because for those that don't know, the unpaid caregivers in America is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it comes with all its own stressors on those caretakers, both mental health-wise and economically. And paying them to do critical work became recognized. And so, to your question about Medicaid funding, there's a few different ways people can access a self-directed program, which is available in all 50 states. One of the most frequently asked questions, do I have this in my state? You do. It may look different. It may be funded different, but there are self-directed options that range from county funding through American aging dollars that funnel down through area agencies on aging and sometimes combine with county levy taxes. And that will allow individuals, and say, I'll just pick a state, the state of Ohio, depending on your county, you can actually get 10 to 12 hours of assisted daily living activity from someone of your choosing to come in the home and provide that care on your schedule. Then it could be Medicaid funding. So Medicaid gets into, there's state plans in every state for Medicaid. Super broad stroke, and I'll put my email in the chat and people can absolutely call me with particular questions, but broad stroke Medicaid, 65 years of age, income requirements that are generally in the neighborhood of $20,000 or less for a single person, 30-ish thousand for a family of 4, 50-ish thousand annual income, anything above 4. Very broad stroke. If you meet those requirements, and many people, how do I know? Here are 3 organizations maybe your audience is familiar with. Maybe you've had people from these organizations, but there are 3 core ones in any state. One is a state like New York, very county driven. Counties are very powerful in New York. A lot of funding flows at the county level. There are county offices in some states focused on aging and access to services and can be resources. If it's not a county-driven state, another great resource is your Center for Independent Living that will at least know what your options are and should include the self-directed options. The third would be area agencies on aging, which oftentimes are doing Medicaid eligibility screening for the states, and you can start with them and at least go through the basics of whether or not you're eligible. And that's to get on the Medicaid state plan, possibly waitlist in some states, not all. And some state plans will have an option on them that you can get your long-term care provided through a traditional agency, or you can self-direct it. If you don't have that available on your state plan, there is something called Medicaid waivers. Every state has waivers. The easiest way to describe them, they're actually properly named. It's when a state says, hey, National Medicaid, we would like to waive our state plan requirements in place of a different set of requirements for a particular population that is often aging and disabled, bundled. And on anyone who gets on this waiver, and some states have wait lists, others don't. Indiana has an aging and disabled waiver, for instance, with 35,000 individuals enrolled on it that can get attendant care, which is basic support with assisted daily living activities for about 15 hours a week. And they can self-direct it, meaning they can pick their own person, set their own schedule, hire, let someone go if need be, etc. And that, so there's waiver options in states. And then there will be some folks that say, I'm not Medicaid eligible and I'm not gonna probably be Medicaid eligible, but I have a grandmother who I desperately would like to take care of. What can we do in that case from maybe a private pay standpoint? And there, that's when you have options ranging from your personal accountant, and how they may want to advise you on paying someone who is unpaid or being paid under the table, above the table, so that the payments that you're getting when you think you're making them under the table are just not good for anyone. You're not, the person's not accumulating any social security, for one thing. We all know messing with the IRS in any way, shape, or so there are ways to keep it above the table. And this model is pretty simple that Medicaid funds and states endorse, this self-directed model, which just a point, it allows Steve Gurney to become, with the in the IRS's eyes, an employer of record. That may sound scary. It's not. It's one simple form and you get a number, a unique identifying number. And then either an accountant or in a Medicaid funded program, a company like Public Partnerships essentially serves as your payroll agent. We do a whole lot more, but maybe we'll get into that later. And makes those payments on the up and up properly. And that would be the best way to go about it, private pay wise. And not that I'm trying to be anyone on your audience is called tax or accountant specialist, because I'm not. If you ever wanted to talk more about private pay options, we could take that offline too.
Okay. This is great. A lot of information. We got a few questions.
Yes.
And one that came in was, can you please repeat the requirements for Medicaid?
Yeah.
I found on Medicaid.gov, I found a page that I dropped into chat, but if you can, and actually let me, while you answer that, or as you answer that, let me kind of share with you my worldview and what I think a lot of our readers' worldview is that, okay, Medicaid is a program for the impoverished. And when it comes to, long-term care, you can only go to a nursing home. It's sort of like, the whole, I think that I hear a lot of people saying, oh, yeah, they told me about this Medicaid waiver for assisted living, but the list, they'll never be able to get me a bed. I think one of in the older adult audience, it's sort of, I got to be impoverished and my only choice is a nursing home. And so if you can kind of comment on both of those, how do you qualify for Medicaid? And then my sort of worldview, I realize it's not accurate with this program there.
Yeah. So the Medicaid waivers in some states, New York's probably got 8 different waivers for probably 6 different populations and multiple waivers for maybe their traumatic brain injury population. Medicaid waivers are one way that states can get around that issue you just described. So in my personal situation, no, we did not get any help from Medicaid. My son would not have qualified for a Medicaid waiver, nor would we still have qualified based on our income. But what we would have qualified if our state had had it, like the state of, I'll just pick on Tennessee, but a lot of states have what is called the Katie Beckett program. Katie Beckett is, so states can make all types of decisions with Medicaid funding, by the way. I was not, and I'll just quickly say, so Medicaid funding is federal dollars that come out of all of our checks, some of our federal tax money. And the feds tell each state, based on a number of economic criteria, for every dollar that you, I'll just say Maryland, put up for Medicaid at the state level, we'll match it at a certain percentage of dollars. And that partnership of funding between state and federal actually creates a pretty flexible system in our country for how different, diverse, I'll say how diverse we are as a country in our perceptions of lots of things, from politics to how to effectively care for our aging population. And so you will have some states like California and New York where the Medicaid requirements are pretty open. They're high. So I don't know, statistically, here's an interesting one. 1/3 of Americans are on Medicaid. In California, that translates to 10, 12, 15 million-ish people that are on Medi-Cal. That's a lot of folks. They have a pretty open, I would say open and, well, frankly, more liberal Medicaid assessment, and more people qualify. Their income threshold is higher. 65 for long-term care from an aging standpoint, not talking waivers where you can waive the age requirement. You can waive things like the income requirement and set the threshold much higher, or you could introduce a Katie Beckett program that was designed for families like mine with a medically fragile child who, even with health insurance, cleaned out our bank account over 24 months. We would have loved the Katie Beckett program. And so I think my point with that is there's general Medicaid program that everyone should know about, probably in your audience. And if you are 65 plus, I would encourage you to do your due diligence and just call your AAA, Area Agency on Aging, and at least get screened, because I am sure, without knowing statistic accuracy, that Texas and California run a little different on their Medicaid eligibility requirements for a whole bunch of reasons. That said, every state, again, has waivers to try to address your concern that, hey, not all of us are impoverished to the degree that we're going to be Medicaid eligible. But guys, we're getting crushed with long-term care bills. You've got your waivers. You've got state programs like a Katie Beckett program where states will, for instance, just another instance, New York has a program for people with traumatic brain injuries that want to live independently in their homes, regardless of age, and they give them rental subsidies to the tune of 1,200 people across the state get a monthly rental to keep them independent. So you definitely want to know what your state does too with some of its own funding and its combined Medicaid funding. There's something called an 1115 comprehensive demonstration waiver now. It's been around quite some time, but it's gaining in popularity again. Some of these things are cyclical because it affords states tremendous flexibility through tremendously difficult healthcare times over the last 3 years to spend their Medicaid dollars and try to get beyond. We just need people at Medicaid spend down, and then we'll help them with care.
Well, you're hitting me with a lot of different things. I'm trying to do Google searches.
Yeah.
Drop in various links. But now Medicaid, that is not, you qualify on state by state. It's not a federal, you don't qualify federally for Medicaid.
Right. So if I move from Massachusetts to New Hampshire, let's say, I would have to reapply for my Medicaid funding. Because, and that the because of that is Medicaid funding is X% federal, X% state. All states keep autonomy over their Medicaid spend. And just because you were getting it in Massachusetts doesn't guarantee I would get Medicaid funding in New Hampshire.
Okay. All right. So that's good. Okay. So, first off, somebody, when you were sharing your story of your son, said miracles keep happening.
I saw that, and thank you. And so true.
Yeah. And then, okay. So someone says, in Massachusetts, does self-directed care program have to come through and be provided by ASAPS, the Area Services Access Points?
No. So that person should definitely email me, because Mass has a lot of programming available for long-term care. And it's complicated. We have managed care organizations in our state. So there's a state plan option for aging elders that can self-direct their services. It's called the Personal Care Attendant Program. And it is actually one of the biggest programs nationally, with almost 50,000 of our aging self-directing their services through our state plan. We also have a number of waivers. And then we also have something called One Care that has a managed care component. That is not the only way. You should shoot me an email, whoever put in that chat. We'll talk next week. And
I've dropped Mark's email in there, but we'll also have it on the recording website. Got a couple of questions there, but I kind of want to try to simplify in my simplistic world, get my hands around this. So, I am I have a parent who I feel might qualify for Medicaid. They're living at home. They may or may not own the home, but we basically think that they might qualify for Medicaid. So so I go through these steps, okay, which I'd like to get into, but ultimately now my parent who qualifies for Medicaid can actually receive care in his home, or maybe it's a parent that's who again, my parent doesn't have much money, so now they're living in my basement and they need additional care, and me and the family have been taking care of this person. If that parent qualifies for Medicaid, what you're saying is that I could have support that Medicaid pays for coming to take care of my parent in my house. But I think I even heard you say, let's say that a college-age son is spending 10 hours a week taking care of my parent. Potentially the college-age son could be compensated for that work. Is that accurate?
100%. Yep. Okay. Yep. So maybe, taking it from that standpoint of, if it's all right, we're gonna run with Steve is attempting to hire his nephew Mark for those 10 hours. And Steve, again, probably starts with the AAA in his state, and you call any one of them and they'll accommodate by making sure you're talking to the right one. And they're going to say, Steve, let me ask you some baseline questions. And they're going to.
Well, I guess the first thing that I should do is when I call my AAA, I need to say, I heard about this self-directed care program, and I have a loved one that I think might qualify.
It's good to put it out there to them, for sure.
Okay.
They're mostly going to be interested in, I'll be honest, are you Medicaid eligible? Okay. And then they're going to want to send a nurse out or have you come in to get eyes on to do a baseline determination of how many hours of assisted daily living activity could Steve use. And at that juncture, and this is where it depends on the state having managed care or not, whether or not you're qualifying for state plan, whether or not there's a slot on a waiver, you're going to likely have some sort of either county or state-funded entity that is billing Medicaid to provide you with some sort of options counseling at that point. So AAAs might play that role. They most often play the role for sure of at least letting you know. An area agency on aging. Oh, that's a good one. AAA, right? Not the auto insurance company. Great question. All these acronyms in long-term care don't make any of it more easy to access for sure. They are called area agencies on aging. Federal funding is involved. Every state has area agencies on aging in place to make sure that our elders can access information about services. I work with some of them at the national level to make sure that their staff are educated on the participant-directed options, self-directed options. They should, Steve, be able to hear that. You know, I heard about self-direction, say, okay, I follow you. I can tell you a bit about that. And then let's just see where you're at eligibility-wise. And then let's get a nurse with some eyes on you to do some basic ADL assessment and see where you stand. And then at that point, whether it's county or state funded, some staff is going to, or managed care funded, someone will get in touch with Steve and say, hi, Steve, I'm Joe Smith from Case Management Agency. I got a referral from either, the county, it could be the AAA if they are contracted to do it, that you need ADL support to the tune of 12, 15 hours a week. And so here are your options. I have a list of home care agencies in your area, and I can make a referral to one of those agencies. They'll contact you within a day or two, and we'll get someone set up to come out to your home. There's another option for you, Steve, because on our Medicaid state plan, we allow you to self-direct. And at that point, they should say self-direction, Steve, allows you to work with a third-party company like public partnerships that will help you enroll as an employer of record. It's not scary. Sign off on a few forms. They will be your payroll agent, and you will be allowed to select the caretakers that you want to provide those 12. And then you would say something like, so my nephew, Mark, happens to come over 10 hours a week out of the kindness of my heart. Could I start paying him? Yes, you could. About the only family requirement you're ever going to see come into play where they say no is a spouse. It's not in all states. I am definitely a guy that could say my wife would probably love to get paid to deal with me. But you might find spousal restrictions. You might find restrictions on whether parents can get paid to care for maybe an autistic child. But you're not going to find many more restrictions than that. And then Steve would say, well, great. I want to hire Mark. I want to do this self-directed thing. I had heard about it already. That's why I'm talking to you. What happens? And at that point, they say, I'm going to put you in contact with a public partnerships, which is called a financial management service provider by CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. Sorry, we're a Medicaid provider type that will help Steve get registered with the IRS, that will start making the payments on his behalf to his nephew, that will file all the taxes. We will do all the Medicaid billing, and Steve should focus on his health, focus on making sure, nephew's doing a good job. So there's more roles and responsibilities. What if nephew all of a sudden gets lazy and doesn't show up for work on time? I will tell families, like, you might have to have the uncomfortable conversation with nephew. And that's, more choice and responsibility of who you want to hire comes with more responsibility. You've got to make sure your nephew submits his time on time, so we pay him on time, and that it's accurate, and that it's within, if you're approved for 12 hours, Mark, you're approved for 12. If you're here for 14, you shouldn't be. Our company, that's where we stay around in the background to let you know, Steve, Mark billed 14 instead of 12 hours. You don't want to self-direction. Some programs afford you some flexibility there to adjust hours on a week-to-week basis based on your need. That's the beauty of it. Our company hangs around, not just processing payroll or dealing with the Medicaid claiming, where there is a resource on the phones. In the event that you're overutilizing your service, I don't want to see you run out of services. We'll play that function. Another key function we play is with that case manager or service coordinator or care manager that made the referral for Steve. I've got to work with him or her very closely because there's a lot of background noise with Medicaid and authorizations. And we do all that, all this stuff that would give the individual a headache, and work with the service coordinator to make sure that the services continue to be authorized. So Steve just focuses on his care.
Okay, that's really good, really interesting. Still a little bit of confusion,
Yeah.
but the fact is, what I understand here are these checks and balances, is that this could be a program ripe with fraud if you didn't have the checks and balances of going through the case manager and going through an organization like yours with the payroll and all that as well. Okay. Elizabeth asks, if a senior owns a home in DC but has low income, does home ownership disqualify the senior from qualifying for Medicaid?
No, so you can own your own home. And the general rule is own your own home and 2,000 in assets. Now, how one state may look at the term assets versus another, that I can't comment on, but you can own your own home.
Okay. Let's see. And Pam asks, what do you do if in DC, another DC member, if you have a low income 80-year-old with the EPD waiver, I'm not sure what that stands for, but that has had an in-home aide at max hours for a few years, but needs more care, but refuses to leave the home for a low income institutional provider. Wow, complicated question there.
And to answer it accurate, I'd have to check out the EPW waiver. That's another person who you should email me next week. I'd have to do a little homework because it gets complicated with levels. So in that case, I'll say quickly, there are fair hearing processes, for instance, that every state has set up, where if there's a perception that needs have changed to the level that I need more funding to stay independent and in my home, I will tell everyone on this phone for sure. States do not, nursing facilities and 24/7 care are very expensive to states. Home and community-based services are tried and true, cost effective. Owning the home, right, Medicaid would like you to stay in your own owned home as long as possible, for sure. When we get into funding options on a particular waiver in DC, you start getting into things like I'd want to know about the fair hearing process, things of that nature. I'd have to have a look at the waivers and some of the service descriptions. It gets complicated, unfortunately, right? But that is the way oftentimes, which is why we're doing this podcast. Most people haven't even heard about the option, never mind how to access it. And then I'm glad that question got asked. There are levels to this that get increasingly complicated to navigate, and let's navigate that next week for sure.
Got it. Okay, great. And remember, folks, I'll have Mark's email on the recording link, but it's in chat right now. Kitchy says, is the self-directed care program only for people with disabilities? What about the medically needed? Or is it more associated with long-term care services and supports?
So states will have waivers for medically fragile folks that offer, so my son would have been classified, at least from 1 until 5 years old, as pretty medically fragile. And if Massachusetts then had a medically fragile waiver. So one way they can address populations outside of aging, physically disabled, and intellectually developmentally disabled, which, for better or for worse, tend to be the three broad categories, three broad lenses that Medicaid funding drops into. So you can have the waivers, you can have states doing the Katie Beckett program for populations that aren't necessarily Medicaid eligible or aging, and have, again, I think the term was medically needy or medically fragile. Anyone who's in that boat should look to the Katie Beckett program in their state, which is just a great program that other states have adopted as one option.
Okay, and I dropped some info about the Katie Beckett program into chat. Okay, let's see here.
I also want to quickly say on that note, I'm sorry to cut you off, Steve, but the Veterans Administration also offers self-directed programs. And if anyone's on today or knows people that are veterans, like everything with the Veterans Administration, it boils down to what your service disability level is. But there is a program called the Veteran Directed Care Program that is available to vets in some states, not all. Hopefully by 2024, 2025, it'll be all 50 states. And the Veterans Administration is also talking about some other new emergent options for self-directed care under some of their existing programs. So I would just put that out there, that the Veterans Administration, if you are a vet or know a vet, let them know that these options exist.
And what was that called again?
Yeah, sure. So there's the Veteran Directed Care Program. That's the most notable under the Veteran Administration. And then I would just say, look at, President Biden just talked about it in his executive address, that the VA is going to be looking at expanding opportunities for self-direction within their system. Probably comes to fruition in 2024.
Okay. Now, somebody had a question about long-term care insurance. And let's see, Wendy says, I was wondering about long-term care insurance. It's prohibitively expensive, and we have no idea if we will be getting the care we need after pouring all that money into the long-term care insurance plan. Wendy, I dropped in a great discussion that we did on the topic of long-term care insurance into chat. Highly recommend you listen to that, because it might open, and there was lots of questions in that discussion on long-term care insurance, so that might help. But how does long-term care insurance play with the self-directed care programs? I'm assuming that most folks that are purchasing long-term care insurance have assets that don't qualify them for Medicaid.
Right. And they're probably going to fall into, it's a broad stroke answer, they're probably going to fall into that private pay category of individual that if they have, and I'm glad you referenced the other podcast. I want to be 100% honest and transparent. I am not a long-term care insurance subject matter expert. And so for me to say too much on that topic, especially if you've recently had an expert on, I should probably stay pretty mum on it. We don't intersect that much, my world and that world.
And let's see, Pam says, thank you for the EPD waiver answered, and I will follow up. A rehab discharge meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, and I would love to connect before that if at all possible. So
for sure.
Okay, and then let's see, Wendy, the long-term care insurance, I am dropping it in again to chat. I hope that you can see that there, but if not, you can email me and I'll send it to you. And I can connect you with some folks in that area. Okay, let's see. Oh, wow. Okay, looking at the clock, we are burning through. We're almost to the top of the hour.
Right.
So the long and the so what really, I'm based in Virginia, and I just assumed, because I had heard so many people talking about it, is that there's no room on these for Medicaid unless you're in a nursing home. And in Virginia, I believe the program is called the CCC program or something like that. And my eyes were open to that. Oh no, if you qualify, you can get in on that program. And
It just so happens, so Public Partnerships was founded in 2000, and in 2006, uh, Virginia approached Public Partnerships, or vice versa. I wasn't here at the time, to take on the role of that we play to this day. It's one of our longest standing states, and pieces of work in the country, to do at that point in 2006 a pretty new novel service delivery model of self-direction. And I think we took it with about 800 to 1,000 individuals. Virginia is a leader in self-direction nationally, with over 20, probably, I haven't checked your numbers recently, but upwards of 25,000 people self-directing their services. That is a high number. It does speak to, you could have listeners on that say that that's it. Well, it speaks to, that's a really big, successful program, and you all swim in these waters, and Steve hadn't heard about it, right? And so that's why, Steve and I met, as he said, with some of my colleagues, to try to spread information about the model and the availability, because even in some of these highly successful states that CMS looks at as real success stories, and I've presented nationally with the state of Virginia twice at the Home and Community-Based Service Conference. That's the work that, like, I'm so appreciative that you all are doing to get the word out, because never mind in states where it doesn't thrive, we have many, many elders that could benefit and are eligible and have someone in mind that they would love to have coming in, and they just don't know.
Well, and when I learned about this, I have a family friend whose son has cerebral palsy, and I immediately asked her about this. She goes, "Oh, we've been involved with that program for years." So I think, it's a wonderful program for older adults and for those of us who need care at any age. But the challenges that families go through when they have a child with a disability, this can provide a lot of financial relief for those families.
Right.
Okay. Well, this has been an awesome discussion. And so let's kind of start wrapping things up. If you had to sort of, any sort of final words of wisdom on our audience as far as this type of care?
My closing comment would be, and I hope I did a good job balancing this narrative from my personal experience. Traditional agencies and providers are needed. They will always be needed. There are great ones out there. There are great staff at them. But we are now moving post-COVID into different times from a healthcare service delivery system. We are in different economic times, and the workforce shortage is very, very real in nursing facilities and at home care agencies. I am sure any of them would back me on that. I don't know that the workforce is coming back to those types of places post a COVID-19 world, post the gig economy and the emergence of a gig economy, and the fact that the United States generally undervalues the value of these direct care workers, and wages as low as $9 an hour in some states to care for our aging and elderly is wrong. And those staff just can't economically afford to continue to keep those jobs when they can cobble together gig jobs and bring in more money. It's the sad reality. We are, as a country, and I feel like maybe I'm dating myself. I feel like I was on the cover of Time magazine 15 years ago about 2030. And that is the year the United States will be older than it's ever been in its history. And all the baby boomers will be 65 plus. And we have known as a country for a long time that the number of people to care for our aging and elderly is dwindling, and the number that in need is going up. We need this model now. It's not, you cannot in many rural parts of any state get timely home care because there aren't enough staff at these agencies anymore. They are valuable. The workers are tremendously valuable. I don't want to minimize that at all, but I want to say we are going to have to rely on the unpaid family caregivers and friends that are providing the billions of care right now, more so than ever before, and not for a time limited period, folks. It is going to last. And so it needs to be, and you've probably heard in discussions, this rebalancing in each state between money spent on home and community service-based options, whether you're Medicaid eligible or not. We don't have enough caretakers, and this is a model that can solve that issue. There's also many ways to get workers proper wages in these models because of some of the Medicaid flexibility. So you're going to hear more about it as a country, whether it's from the Veterans Administration, the Biden office, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. It's been around for 20, 30 years as kind of a luxury. And now I really do think it's not a luxury anymore. We need this option to thrive.
I love it. Okay. And the, let's see, this always happens when I say, hey, closing statements, then we get a few more questions. But someone asked, did wages increase during COVID with the special pandemic rates? You know,
yes. So a lot of states made rate increases, but the workforce shortages persist. Trust me. We're pretty far away from where we need to pay our direct care workers.
And then Elizabeth has a great question. I don't know if you have this data, is what is the approximate compensation for a family friend caregiver through these Medicaid programs? Do you have any data on that?
So what I should have mentioned, it's not true in every self-directed model, but some self-directed models also allow Steve to set the wage of the employee out of his Medicaid budget. Now, that obviously means the higher the wage, the less hours of care. However, that is another big, now I didn't want to talk about it too much because a lot of models don't offer that option. That is a huge lever to pull in getting proper compensation. Wage increases are another, and for sure, but have they gone up in the way that we need them to go up? No. Have they gone up in the participant directed models the way? No. What you start to need is a recognition that Steve's budget needs to increase by X amount to allow him to have the financial flexibility to pay the higher wage. You're going to hear a lot about this in the next 5 years.
Yeah,
sure.
And I'll share on the screen. I dropped in the link, but we heard a lot of publicity around this AARP report that
yes.
That, and it looks like I'm freezing here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, yeah, I'm frozen there. So, but Kitschy had a question. There you should see the AARP report there.
Yes, 600 billion. Yep.
Unpaid care, and this program is something that can help compensate some of that unpaid care. But Kitschy has a great question, and she asks, can a family member who is a professional provider get payment to provide care? So I'm assuming like a nurse or an LPN.
Yes, and that tends to be through the waiver programs, but absolutely yes, and not in all states, but.
And then earlier you had said something that is you call the area agency and then they give you a list of agencies. So do agencies need to be qualified to be on that? Like, is there a certain thing, like, because we have a lot of home care agencies that tune into these, does a home care agency need to go through some steps? Or in the self-directed model, could I basically say, like, for example, in Sourcebook here, we list some home care providers. If they weren't on the list that the Area Agency on Aging gives, could you call any home care agency to provide care?
So I think the front end of that question, I want to make clear, a direct care worker could work for a home care agency and then also have a different individual they serve who's self-directing and has them being paid through public partnerships. And those are two, that's almost like working at McDonald's and Burger King. And that's permissible. Nothing prohibits that. I don't know if was that the core question?
Well, no, like our agencies.
Oh, and then the agency piece. So this states can get very, very creative. And I am working with a family right now in Indiana, an aging adult female who has 5 W-2 employees that she is the employer for, and they are all self-hired by her, paid through our company as the payroll agent. And then she also has skilled nurses coming into the home from an agency that would be on that list that you talked about. So it is a bit of a tricky one in that I don't want to say yes or no because it depends on the flex, but states are really getting creative post COVID-19 with some pilot programs and stuff. So it is conceivable for sure.
Okay, great. I copied a comment from someone who's in their 80s trying to find good care options that will not take my funds for a matter of month. And she was a healthcare worker herself, and she understands the problems when workers are so poorly paid and given such little respect. So thanks for sharing that. And then Elizabeth says, does Medicaid send inspectors or case managers to the home to investigate the quality of caregiving or detect fraud?
Not in self-directed models. I am, of course, I'm going to have my own opinion on Medicaid fraud, waste, and abuse. My opinion is that if we pulled up the statistics on the dollars that any state, even the bigger spenders, spend on home and community-based services, and then as a subset of that on their self-directed options, it is a fraction and a very small fraction of that state's overall Medicaid spend. To the degree that Medicaid fraud, waste, and abuse that really stings a state is just simply not going on at the Mark Altieri, Steve Gurney level that you would think it is. Now, there are things like technologies like electronic visit verification that a lot of programs require, the geo-match to make sure Mark was actually at Steve's home. There are additional functions like counselors, they're called financial counselors, support brokers that can be other Medicaid waiver services that will provide some quality assurance and check-in and monitoring over the level of care. Our company, Public Partnerships, is a financial management service provider. While it sounds like we only do financial management service provision, we're mandated reporters. Me, everyone on our phones are. If we hear that Steve is abused or neglected, we are mandated to report that as abuse and neglect within 24 hours, like any other mandated reporter. And we definitely hope that the people that get our services trust us enough to make that call to us. So not in-home oversight, but you would hope anyone self-directing their services, they've got a case manager, a service coordinator, a public partnerships in their life to let us know. And we do. For sure, we do get reports of abuse, fraud. This employee I'm trying to fire and won't go away. Can you help me? Yes, there are supports out there for that.
I love it. Well, this has been a great discussion, and you've got a member, a new member of your fan club. Leslie says maybe we should have him again. He was so helpful, and I agree. Leslie, let's. We need this. I think this is a discussion that has to be out there constantly for people to understand that they can that there's more resources that they may or may not know about. So Mark, thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you all.
To our audience members, once again, I mean, Mark is the star of the show, but you're a close second because the questions that you ask really advance a discussion to make this real and authentic. And I love it. But everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you at some of the discussions next week.